Hello again, Steve here with a few comments about God, Logos, and the Holy Spirit. Now, I came upon this idea to talk about after watching a few videos by this guy called E. Michael Jones. You might want to check some of his stuff out if you're interested in sort of the Christian, especially Catholic approach to theology and what goes on in the world and whatnot. And it's kind of controversial to some people because there's a fair bit of talk about the Jews, but it's talked about in terms of historical analysis and what have you. So I don't think that's controversial really, but it's controversial in some people's minds, of course. But the ongoing struggle between the Catholic Church and the Jews, this is a very historical thing throughout Europe, especially. And I came upon this guy as a result of listening to, trying to figure out what the heck happened to Owen Benjamin, the the guy from giantpianist.com. And I found out that he's sort of persona non grata on a lot of different channels now because he went a little bit ballistic on a bunch of people, I guess. But anyway, so he listens to E. Michael Jones, and that's where I heard about him, this guy. So I started listening to some of his stuff, and it's very, very interesting what E. Michael Jones talks about because he talks a lot about logos. And apparently in the Gospel of John, the first part of it, most Bibles will say in the beginning there was the Word, and the Word was God, and so on. But in the Greek, what it was written in originally, it would have said in the beginning there was logos, and logos doesn't just mean word. I mean, apparently, the Greek had a much the word logos in the Greek had a much broader sense to it. It meant, well, in the Christian context, it's the second person of the Trinity, which is Jesus, apparently the Son, right? Which I'm going to talk a little bit about that too. But also, it means such words as reason, or the order of the universe, or something like that. So it's this, and the way I look at it is kind of like this. And the reason I like to talk about this stuff is, once again, the first pillar, the first member of the Trinity, if you will, of the mission statement of the Inner Genie Project is self-knowledge. So the more we learn about ourselves, the better off we are. Now, religion, we can learn a lot about ourselves through religion, of course, because religions are concocted by man. I mean, much to some people's chagrin, I shall say that. But yeah, I mean, these things are written with this guy called John. I suppose he was a guy somewhere back in the time, and he wrote this gospel. I mean, people say, oh, it was inspired by God or whatever, but let's put that aside for a moment and say, okay, well, all this stuff is written by guys, so we can learn about their psychology and their way of thinking in a way, right? So the way this Christian, this mostly Catholic, I guess, concept of the God is that you have this fatherly God, like God the Father, right? That's sort of the over God, or the higher realm of God. That is sort of the uncontrollables, right? Like I talk about controllables and uncontrollables. I mean, the fact that there's a universe there, and there's an Earth there, and there's planets, and there's air to breathe, and all that sort of stuff, nobody can claim to have come up with that. We didn't invent that, right? So, the story is that God creates this stuff, and he creates his son, right? Son is kind of an old term for his offspring, the growth of his seed or whatever, his seed of his ideas or whatever. And that is the logos. The logos is the order of things, how it is that things go. There's a logical sequence to things. And we see that in the universe. We see that when we look at stuff. There's a scientific method that we can study things. There's cause and effect. There's, when you put this element with that element, this happens, and so on. And it's predictable, right? So that's the logos. And what he's saying is that in the Gospel of John, I believe, he says, I could be wrong on this, but he says that this Son of God is the logos. And so we could say that God creates this order, and because there's order, and because there's sequential order, and one thing happens after another, there can be the universe. And we can see that logically, even scientifically. You couldn't have the universe if there wasn't order, if there wasn't a logical construct. There's not randomness. There's this truth, this behind it, right? And also, reason is a strength that man has, right? We're unique in all the different creatures of the world. We can reason, whereas Animals are reactionary. The lower animals, they're all reactionary and they run on instinct and so on, and on emotion and what have you. But man can reason, and this is part of the Logos. And this is why I suspect in the story of this Trinity, they depict Jesus as man, this God-man. Because in Jesus is the personification of Logos. There's, of course, his whole physical being. That's part of Logos. That's all material and all acting in accordance with the laws of the elements and the laws of science and what have you. But also he's able to reason, and he's also of the good, because the good is also of logic and so on. So that's God the Father, and that's the Son then, right? The offspring, the prodigy, the development of the Godhead, because who created the logic? None of us did, right? None of us created the order of the universe. So then the Holy Spirit is something even more unique and more mysterious. That is life itself. That is life itself. And I suspect the reason why, when I was down in Mexico and I saw this beautiful, beautiful old Spanish church, where you had above the altar, you had way up in the top, you had God the Father. And then down on the left, you had Jesus. And over on the right, you had Mary. I suspect that Mary, nobody talks about it, of course, because they always want to, put the woman out of it. But the Mary is the Holy Spirit. Because you've got to think about it, in the ancient days, the woman was rather mysterious. Nobody really knew what happened down there, right? I mean, you planted your seed, and then you had this life coming. It was almost like the giver of life. Like they used to see the man as the sort of the embodiment of logic, but the woman, the embodiment of spirit, where life came from. Is very mysterious, right? Whereas logic wasn't quite as mysterious. So I think that kind of explains it in a way. And a lot of this is all going on within ourselves, right? I mean, except for God the Father, that is. God the Father, what it is going on within ourselves, we're interacting with it, and the whole breathing of our breath and the beating of our heart and all that sort of stuff is, well, it remains mysterious to us. That's part of that Holy Spirit going on. It's really mysterious, but it's beautiful in a way. Like you have this uncontrollable, which is everything around us and everything within us that was not created. We're bestowed with it, basically. We're bestowed with the benefits of it. And then we ourselves and everything around us is basically the growth of the seed of this God, right? And we have bestowed on top of us even something grander. It's this other element of Logos, which is this ability and this, I would say, this necessity to follow the Logos, to live in accordance with the Logos, but also to seek to understand the Logos. And this is why we have this inquisitive mind in a way, right? But we also have this life, which we have for a while, which seems to be almost part of, but a little bit almost separate from. It's like a unique corner of this whole Logos, and it's mysterious to us still. Nobody really knows what is consciousness, right? We know what it does to some extent, but we don't really know what it is and why it comes into being. Like why, when an egg and a sperm come together, is there a growth which develops into also consciousness? Okay, the physical we get, right? But the ability to reason and so on, it's really, really quite astounding. And I think that's getting to the point of this Holy Spirit. It's like, and of course the Christians have this concept of this Christ, this Logos being a part of us, being in everybody, right? In everybody. But especially in those who understand it. It's more alive in those who understand it to some extent. And of course, in order to experience this, is to be filled with the Holy Spirit. We have to be filled with life, to be filled with curiosity. And those who go on to the dark side, they're no longer filled with this curiosity, they're filled with ideology at that point, right? And it also explains the whole concept of devil in a way. It's really interesting because the devil is the flipping of this stuff upside down, the abuse of the logos, the ignoring of the logos, and of course the use of all the benevolence that's given by this creation for simple titillation of the temple of logos, if you will, which is the human body. It's very intriguing. So it's actually, in a way, to understand this, I think it's a call out for us to be as best we can to to take care of this, of the body that we're given, which to some extent is really a part of the Godhead in a way, because it's what we haven't created. But then we're bestowed with this ability to be curious and to begin to understand and continue to understand the logos, to reason, to be to be to have fidelity to truth and honesty and reason and evidence and so on, and then to celebrate the spirit of life, right? It's really kind of a beautiful dance of understanding and so on, and it's all about self-knowledge. I think it's an ancient sort of craft of understanding self-knowledge before the time when there was much in the way of what we would call science. But in some ways, it was a very, very developed way of sort of internal travel and self-knowledge without all of the stethoscopes, shall we say. Anyways, what can we learn here? Well, hopefully we can just realize that there was many ways, many paths to self-knowledge. And I believe this is one of them. And, sure, you can see a lot of cons in the whole Christian development and in many religious developments. But of course, there had to be some benefits if people were to keep going with it for so many years. And I think there's been a lot of thought go into this over the years. And it just makes, in so many ways, a lot of logos. Steve here, getting great chatting. If you like what I'm doing, please like, subscribe, and share. I want to talk again soon. Bye for now.